morning, everyone. My name is Vivek Khanna, and I am the President and Chief Client Partner here at Yamaha. It's my ultimate pleasure and honor to host this panel today. A set of the most iconic industry leaders in the EOR and global payroll industry. And I'm so thankful to each one of that crew from Omnipresent in it, from Papaya Global, Job from Remote, and Rick from Atlas. Welcome, one and all, to our CEO Power Panel session today. I am sure, as the folks in CNN say, all our viewers here in the United States and all over the world, we expect that this session will be viewed by at least people from 120 countries. That's the number of people who have already registered to listen to each one of you. I thank each one of you for being part of today's panel. Let's kick this off, and why don't we go around and each one of you give a short introduction, less about yourself, but more about your company and how. Why don't you kick this off?
Sure. So, Rick Hamill, founder and CEO of Atlas. A little bit about Atlas is that we are a 100% direct employer record in roughly 163 countries. We were very focused on building that model because we wanted to, well, partly I was a client before. I was a client of an EOR provider who had an indirect model, and it really created some not so good employee experiences when I was working in government services. And when I left the government sector, I really wanted to focus on a cleaner model, one that had more boots on the ground, more direct support, more autonomy, and more direct liability managed the client and our organization. As I mentioned earlier, we're 163 countries, all 100% direct. We recently branded, so we're excited about that this year with the launch of our platform. And one thing that we're very focused on is not just the client experience, but the worksite employee experience, and really making sure that we're creating an impact and really the worksite employees and employers to make sure that they have opportunity to work together.
Thank you so much, Rick, for the short introduction. Joe, I know we do you.
Thanks, Vivek. I'm Joop, co-founder and CEO of Remote. I'm in the Netherlands. Actually very similar to Rick's experience. I worked in an organization or at GitLab where we had people all over the world, and it was an incredible pleasure to do that. But I think the most important lesson from that was that amazing people are everywhere, and so we made it our mission to make sure that independent of who you are, where you are, you should have access to great opportunities. And so how can we solve that? Is by lowering the threshold to actually hire people internationally. And the threshold is traditionally very high because of compliance, which we all know really well is a huge pain, but also because it's really expensive to hire people abroad. And so what we believe at Remote very much is that if you build an incredibly efficient and strong way of providing the service, allowing you to hire anybody anywhere. And we do that by running all our own operations on all our own infrastructure, and then making sure we're incredibly efficient on top of that. Not only can you provide a much better experience to hiring people anywhere, but also you can make it much more cost effective and much faster, right? And like that lowers the threshold. And so that's what we're focused on. With Remote today, you can hire someone in about 20 minutes in virtually any country in the world. At a price that is literally unbeatable, and that's why we did it, to lower the threshold, to eventually make it so that hiring someone locally is as easy as hiring someone on the other side of the planet.
Wonderful job. And so to move on to Init, thank you for joining us from Television. Then please introduce yourself and handle.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Einat, CEO, co-founder at Papaya Global. Papaya is a global workforce management platform. We are a purely technology company. We are developing everything to ensure that we can facilitate the total workforce of clients. So everywhere they work around the world, from payroll, EOR, contractors, into one technology platform. We embedded our core payroll payments platform into the product recently, and because we believe that eventually payroll and payment should go together. So we are all about eventually assuring that clients that already have quite massive footsteps around the world can get a better product and better outcome by consolidating everything and monetizing and controlling everything from one place. We are about 800 people currently ourselves, globally ourselves as well, and growing very, very quickly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You're the last one on the lot. Why don't you go ahead?
Good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm Günther. I'm Austrian by nationality, but based in Dubai in the meantime. And I guess the beginning of Omnipresent was a bit different to the other co-founders in here. I founded the business with my co-founder Matthew Wilson through the Entrepreneur First Accelerator program in London. We met in autumn 2019, and through coffee chats came about this, the problem of employing people internationally. And the more we looked at it, the more we got fascinated on one hand by the huge issue, the huge challenge, difficulty of employing people internationally. And on the other hand, of the huge opportunity that we saw. And our thesis at that time was that if we could productize the service that existed at that time already, then this could be hugely beneficial for the people who want to employ internationally. And obviously it also gives you a very interesting business model. And that's how Omnipresent came about. The way we want to, the way we think we see Omnipresent serve our clients best is a combination of tech solutions with human expertise. So our vision, so to say, is to help our clients to build global teams. And that's what we are focusing on.
Fantastic. Thank you. And what could be more global? As we just noticed, Gunther is in Dubai, Inet in Tel Aviv, Job in Amsterdam, Rick in Chicago, and I am here in the Silicon Valley. So, as global as it can be, I guess we are all very global. So to kick the panel off, the first question that is always on top of my mind, we all have experienced immense amount of growth since 2020. The pandemic was, I guess, in many ways to say, the tipping point, right? And the work from home became rigor. It needed a whole different business model for everyone, including from startup enterprises. But we have seen 2022 come back to normal, right? Slowly but steadily, companies have come back to normal. So I'd love to get your inputs into how have you seen this transition? And then what do you see for our industry going into 2023?
I'll start. So there's a couple of things. I think that although the world is starting to get back to normal from COVID and, working from home, I think employers are also still having to be competitive in the marketplace. Employees have gotten very comfortable working from home, not just the comfort of it, but also their lifestyles. They're closer to their families. They've got more time for their personal items as well. They've got the flexibility to get the job done from home. So when you're looking at finding talent, employers are still having to compete with more of that remote workforce from that perspective. Also, because we've seen success of remote workforce, we've also seen that talent organizations have been looking for talent, not just in their own zip code, their own countries, but looking for the best talent around the world because they've seen that remote work actually work. And so although we're seeing the shift get back to normal, that pendulum to start to go kind of more in the center, our organization, we're starting to find more and more companies are looking to still be flexible, still be competitive, to retain talent in these particular markets, allowing employees to work wherever they want. So we're actually seeing a lot more growth. It's not just new talent that they're looking for, it's existing talent that they're looking to retain and allowing them to move wherever they want because of what's best for them. So I can give an example of that recently happened last week. A client came to us and said, look, we've got 3 employees that lived in New York. They actually want to move to Toronto, which is about 3.5 hour drive. So same time zone, but different country. And obviously, once they go into a different country, they cannot, they don't have new studios, so they can't necessarily employ them. And so they came to us and said, "Look, we want to work with you guys in this country. We want to retain these employees. We want to be flexible. We want to be competitive, and we want to retain talent." And so we're seeing more of that happen, especially like if you're not the environment where maybe employers are not necessarily looking at or expanding their talent counts right now. But team talent, we're finding more and more of that in this environment from existing employees where they have countries where they have entities to where we're actually going now. About
Anyone else? Any different opinions?
Maybe I'll say that, I disagree that was a tipping point. I think that eventually company were global before COVID and will remain global because eventually the world is, kind of a global space. I think that the only thing that's really changed with COVID is the ability to extend the network of people that you are hiring internally in the company. And I think that we went from kind of work from everywhere trend that was very kind of trendy during COVID to a recognition that work from anywhere is not necessarily the best way to scale an organization. So you need to have more flexibility. You need to eventually find the good balance between where people are and how it serves right the business. And we see more and more trends of global hubs and giving people the flexibility to work from very specific locations that serves the companies other than just picking their individual locations. And I think that this is probably here to stay because eventually I think that people are more relocating or finding the right place around the world to live, either from, reasons as we have in Ukraine and Russia, or just eventually kind of cost of living costs and so on. But it doesn't mean, or what we see, and I think that this is actually a good trend in terms of employers, is the fact that you need to have much more visibility, compliance, a very strong compliance approach before you are taking a decision where do you hire people. And it needs also to fit the organization eventually needs by all means.
Not what we do.
I think the interesting thing, and I actually think that COVID was a huge stepping point for this, is that we've seen this change in the power dynamics between employers and employees, right? Where previously you had to live wherever your employer was, or you had to move to a place where you could find a great job. And that has completely shifted because today, if you want to move to a different place where your current employer isn't, you can find another one. Because even if there's nothing around, you can just find a remote job. And that is something that basically didn't exist before, right? Today, the demand for remote work is far greater than the supply of it. But the supply of it is like increasing in an insane degree, right? You see almost any employer, like Ines is saying, almost any employer is becoming an international employer and hiring the best people. If you want to hire great people and you can't outspend everybody in your neighborhood, you have no choice but to hire internationally. And so there's this beautiful, virtuous cycle of people wanting to look for more remote work, for more international opportunities, more employers realizing that, well, that's the way I get great people. I mean, the proving points now to do that. And now all companies like our own that are showing, well, at any reason that in the past you might have thought, well, this is hard to do or this is not possible, we can just show you, well, it is possible and we can support it. Independent of like what the form is or what the, whether you hire someone directly or through an EOR or you contract with them, we all do our best to make it easy. And I think that's the coolest thing. And that we only see that accelerating. The entire market is just exploding in size.
Sure. Right. I don't do the opposite. I have more. So, what what do you see?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would agree with Rick and Job and Enothi, and at the same time, in a way, I guess I would be somewhere in between by saying that COVID was a huge accelerator. So when we found the business, the trend already was there. I think that was just before COVID. And that was already very exciting for us. But then COVID really has I do think accelerated this trend massively, and I do think that we saw a seismic shift. That I would say. What I would also say is that the trend that was accelerated by COVID will not go away. There are people who would say that this will now go back to where it was before COVID. We don't think this will happen, and we don't see this in our data and the way that our clients behave. So, while the remote work and distributed teams is not necessarily for everyone, that's not the case, but the trends towards remote work and the freedom that it gives to the employees, and also the benefits that it gives to employers, as Joop has described. If you need to hire quick and good people, you cannot just hire them in our countries, that you cannot find them. You simply cannot find them. So that's how I would describe this. And perhaps one last comment to what Einat also said, and that's I assume this is due that we serve slightly different clients. So, as you were saying, that you're seeing that clients are building out hubs. We not necessarily do see this. We see that sometimes people grow out of the employer of record because they have 10, 15, 20 people in a country, and then of course they set up their own entity. But other than this, our client base is very distributed. They come to us because they have found those 5 engineers, and they happen to sit in 5 different countries, and then they need a service, maybe employer of record service, or whatever is best for them to employ those people. So these hubs, as you have described it, Einat, we don't see, but again, that may be due to the fact that we serve slightly different clients, perhaps.
Yeah, no, if I can jump in a little quick on this as well, I think when we look at prior to COVID, and our organization was doubling every year prior to COVID. So I think part of what we're seeing here as well is that we were inching towards that already. I think COVID accelerated that, but when companies, it never, when I'm speaking at an engagement or I've done a webinar, it never fails me when someone says, "Oh my God, I was looking for a service like this. Where have you been?" It's the education of what we have to do in this industry to make sure people understand that employers were looking for flexible ways to retain talent and find talent. So that was prior to COVID. Now, COVID did accelerate that because the need was much more at that point. But companies, as they learned about the employer of record model, they were continuing to look at it. I think all of our businesses who were here prior to COVID, we saw that continued growth from that perspective. I think the one thing that employers are starting to think about a little bit more now is what's the trade-off between remote work and fully remote teams or having office space. And I think that's what we're starting to see as well, is not only are they finding the best talent, not only in the zip code, but around the world, but they also can look at the cost savings that they're having as an employer to really invest more into their people, into their overall global strategy. Most employers, when they're looking at global expansion, the first thing they think about, especially small to mid-sized businesses, startups and scale-ups, really think about global expansion. That's the IBMs of the world. That's the Google of the world. I can't afford that. Where with an employer of record model, I like to use China as an example quite often. It takes 18 months to set up an institute in China, $250,000, give or take, an investment into the country. A small business, a startup or scale-up can't afford that. That's a hindrance of their cash flow that they can use for other things. The employer of record model allows them to do that. And during COVID, a lot of employers realized that they did not want high concentrations of employees in one given country. You look at Spain, you look at what happened in China. These are countries that had, high risk due to COVID. And if one department or one team went down, it could really impact the overall business. So not putting high concentration in given countries, scaling the organization, and not having to look at investment and scale of setting up entities around the world allowed them to be more flexible. You saw in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, a lot of startups scaled very quickly using this model. I've got plenty of clients who came to us and said, if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be that successful because they didn't have the infrastructure, they didn't have the compliance, they didn't have the legal, they didn't have the dollars to really go out and do what really took what traditionally what we call the brick and mortar of setting up and doing business abroad. So the employer of record model, in my opinion, changed the game. It changed how businesses really decided how they're going to expand. It gave them a lot more money back in their own pockets to invest into other things, better infrastructure, and it gave them a lot more flexibility. Instead of putting, $250,000 into China in 18 months, and now because they did that big investment, they're going to put all their staff there. Now they can say, well, I'm going to maybe test China for 2 or 3 people. I'm going to put people in Hong Kong. I'm going to put people in Australia. I'll put people in the UAE. I have a lot more flexibility for the same cost I would have had traditionally setting up an institute in a given country. And that flexibility is what I think propelled our industry, because employers were able to do it differently. Think of the individuals who are sitting in the seats of HR, CEOs, CEOs. These are the millennials in that particular marketplace, in that industry, and they are the industry. We are the industry, or in the industry, the age band that wants everything done very quickly. I call it the popcorn generation. We want it done that fast. And so the fact that they can onboard employees in a matter of hours or days, the fact that they can do it all through technology, they can do it through a mobile app, that changed how we thought about global expansion, changed how we thought about strategy. It changed how we thought about employee retention and being a flexible employer. It changed the game. And I think what we have to give our credit, our industry, and everyone on this panel, is that we fundamentally changed how people did business and how they thought about employing employees around the world.
Rick, you're absolutely right. And if I was to echo everybody's sentiment, we all believe that this is a permanent change. While there was a tipping point, it has permanently changed how companies are going to, globalize. And Ineth, you're absolutely right. Globalization was always there in the parts because, especially I have come from the IT outsourcing world, and the entire aspect of globalization started over there. Except, yes, it was a hub-based scenario. You had a number of people, and still is the largest, right? You have companies hiring in thousands, in using, some of the largest names in the business, the top 10 names, everybody, including the Accenture, the IBMs, the Infosys, the Wipros, the HCLs. But you had them in hubs, in one local hubs. And I think that's the major disruption that is yet to come from our industry, which will disrupt the IT outsourcing industry. But that said, I think one of the other questions that everybody talks about from our industry, which is the employer of record, and then maturing into global payroll when you have your own entity set up, you can still utilize our services, is about this dichotomy between our employers looking for technology solution, are they looking for a service solution? Is it direct, as Rick said, or indirect, as a lot of us use, the different models? So, what's your thought process? From your perspective, what are the clients really looking for? And especially you, in your case, because you also now bundled the payment services, which was the last mile, which is very important. So, please.
Yeah, so I think the last mile is really kind of the key here, because eventually what we realized is, as you are trying to solve a problem, you need to assure that it's 100% solved, right? So, payroll processing is one thing, payment is another thing. If you don't combine those two things together, this is becoming a problem that is actually not 50% solved. It's not solved. It's still a problem for you. Assuring that you have the trust and the peace of mind that everything has been done compliantly. So I think that compliance is actually the key words here from the very, very early stage to the end of the process. And I think that everything that is related to global workforce, and I've been in this industry for 20 years, is really about creating this trust with your clients, that once you are in control and once you are taking over the liability to manage the workforce, to pay them, to employ them, you are doing it from the first moment to the ongoing and to the payment time and so on. So from our perspective, it's always about assuring that we have full control and the client have full visibility. Because I think that payroll, and we are all here, it's not about being the cool people around the block. It's really about assuring that it's seamless process, it's as smooth as possible. None of the employees wants to deal with their payroll cycle. They just want to assure that everything is being done correctly and on time. This is our first and foremost job. And once you are creating this peace of mind and quiet in the organization from A to Z, this is where you win on the client side. This is where you win also on the employee side.
Absolutely. So, Job, you all lead with technology first along with India. So, you all are the technology company. Please give us your perspective from a technology perspective. What do you see from your clients and the role then the service plays in this whole industry?
Yeah, I don't think of them as separate things, right? I think the way we build remote is if I think about any product or service, to me it's the same thing, right? If you have a service that is your product that you're offering, what you want is that it's easy and it's straightforward, it's easy to understand, or it's transparent to the end user, and it feels responsive, whether you're talking to someone and they have a reply directly, or whether it is you're using a piece of software and it works really, really well. And so when we built the organization, what was for us very important is, well, whatever doesn't work, we should be able to address, and whatever we feel like is repetitive or slow, we should be able to either move out, make disappear by automating it, or make it really, really fast. And so the way we've always built our organization is by marrying the two as much as we can, so that any part of all the stuff that we have to do, right? As an EUR, there's the amount of stuff you have to do is incredible. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's payroll, there's benefits, there's all sorts of registration, all sorts of payments that you have to do. And so what we make sure of is that first, we can control everything. So we don't rely on external parties for the most important parts of our service. And two, for everything that happens regularly, we make sure that it is automated so that we don't have to spend time on it and it's all instant, right? If we do that really well, I believe we do, then what we can do is the rest of the time that we have with all the people that we have in our team, we can actually spend building a great service, so that if you have a question for something and we didn't, we failed in serving you the information up front and you couldn't find it in our resources, you can just talk to someone and they have the time to help you with that. And so that's how I think about designing EOR, and I think most other products as well. It's that the technology and the service are one and the same thing, and they go hand in hand. And it shouldn't be that one does the thing. And I would not say that remote is like a company where we don't want to offer great service because everything is technology. No, it's quite the opposite. Like, we build all the technology so we can spend more time on, the place where people actually need help, or whenever they actually want to talk to somebody.
Absolutely. No, thank you for clarifying. So, Gunther, coming to you, I think amongst the lot, you are the younger of the block. You all had only at Omnipresent had a little bit of time to see what others had done. When you all went about designing your thought process, how do you see this whole model of technology service, direct, indirect, and then the upcoming role of global payroll? Gunther, you're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, omnipresent is definitely the baby in this round. That is clear. And at the end of the day, I think the clients, and that was, I think, said by both speakers, just care about a solution reality, whether this is product or service is not so important. But the way we think and the way we see the clients want these services is twofold. On the one hand, the trend goes towards a product. People do want to do things online, and if they don't have to speak to a human, they prefer not to normally. But what we do is very complex, right? And often people still do want human touch and have questions, and then they do want to speak to a human to clarify all those difficult questions. So that's why we have that's why we have built Omnipresent in this combination of on the one hand go very hard on automating and automate wherever possible, but keep the human touch wherever necessary. That's the mantra that we follow at Omnipresent, and that's how we built Omnipresent really.
So, Rick, from your perspective, you've been, I guess, the older part. You've seen this industry go from out of staffing, I think, now into this old global outcome. What do you believe?
Yeah, so our model here at Atlas is, we're a service-enabled technology organization. So service is definitely going to be the foundation of that. I mean, look at our industry. Our industry is human resources. So there's a human factor that has to be there, which I think is really important in how you support your clients. Now, we've built our end-to-end solution where we can truly onboard, manage, and pay employees directly through our platform. Our clients have full access, and there's a mobile app for that as well. And so we're very focused on technology in that respect. But we also understand that sometimes some things cannot be answered through technology. Sometimes if you have to do a termination of employees, or you have to look at, how you're going to do RSUs and manage that, those are things that clients maybe need some explanation, and they have that support through us. We're very focused from that perspective on service, but we're definitely, again, as I mentioned, service-enabled technology organization. When we think about the direct model, I think this was really important to us. Why I think this is the key model to go through an employer of record is that we fundamentally know how we do business in those countries because we have a vested interest. Because we are the actual legal employer, we have to be able to, we take on that liability. So if it's done wrong for any reason, we are the ones that are liable for it, not a third party. We got that vested interest with our clients. But fundamentally to that as well, because we know how to do business in those countries, we learned how to onboard and offboard employees in France, learn how to do money movement into China, learn how to do pension payments into Brazil. We learned how to do that, and then we built our technology based on that experience. So it wasn't just a technology platform that we built and we figured out how to learn how to do business in those countries. We built it fundamentally because doing business in each country is very different. Fundamentally, you got to make sure employees get paid on time. You got to make sure you do it compliantly. But the way that people are used to doing business in that country, it can't be what I like to say, it can't be the American way. It's got to be localized, or we like to say globalized, right? We can be global but local. And I think from that perspective, our technology has been able to be very successful from that perspective because we are looking at when we're in country, we're supporting the employees what they're used to and the overall experience. So I like to use the example from the US, since you're based in the US as well. If you go to an employee and say, you don't have to fill out an I-9, you don't have to fill out a W-4, just give me your information and we'll make sure you're paid, the employee would think there's something wrong because they're used to fundamental steps to get things done. So when we look at overall technology, those steps are based on a local perspective in those local languages and able to really support the employee, not giving them an American experience, but giving them a local experience in a global environment, which is really important to us from a technology lens and why that's really important to have that direct model.
Sure. So let me take the next step. And I guess given the time, maybe this may be the final question. What do we see as the threats to our industry and to our growth? We all know it's growing. I don't know, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the global employment company concept that I'm hearing more and more, where certain larger organizations are going through this process. Is that a threat to the EOR industry? What do you think, Joe? Or why don't you take the call on what's the threat to our industry?
No, I don't think that specifically is a threat. In part because there's fewer large companies than there is smaller companies. But I think the biggest threat is that we do a poor job, right? If EOR as a model and companies like ours don't do a good job of making this really accessible and easy and honestly affordable, will give a bad name to global employment, and that can't really happen, right? So even if my company, does incredibly well, but everybody else in the industry doesn't do very well, that would still be bad for us because that would leave EOR as a bad thing, and that people would consider this as like a second-rate form of employment. I think that is a really big risk, and that is actually one that I am really, really concerned about, right? We all have to be incredibly excellent at what we're doing. I think if you look at the global EOR market, and if you look at all the products in the market right now, I don't think any of them are great, right? I set a really high bar of the kind of product that I want to build, the kind of experience I want to land. And sure, we can all say that we have super happy customers. But if you think about like the way our products work today and the experience that they provide, they're good, but they're not great yet. And they have to be really great for this to work long term. Employers should feel, and in particular individuals should feel like there's no better way to receive your salary through an EOR or through one of these global payroll organizations like my own. If we don't succeed at that, employers long term will start to look at different solutions, other solutions, whatever they may be, right? I think that's a really big threat. I think the other threat is governments, in particular countries, making it hard to employ people locally through this kind of model, or making it less digital, like legislation we're seeing in Germany, for example. That gives us all headaches and is incredibly painful. Not necessarily a global threat to this model, but it certainly doesn't help anybody if it becomes harder to employ somebody. I think that's it. I think the most important thing, above all, more important than the success of our individual companies, is that we have the proof that independent of where you are in the world, independent of what you look like, where you live, you can do amazing work, and you should get paid for that appropriately, right? Anybody deserves that kind of opportunity. And that has to succeed, no matter how. I think that's the most important thing. And if we do a good job, that might be one of the ways.
Absolutely, Job. I couldn't agree any less. We as an industry survive if all of us do very well. Inyat, Rick, Gunther, any comments on threats to our industry?
Yes, I would say that the threats are from both directions. First, I think that EOR is a great solution, but it's an interim solution, okay? It will never replace direct employee-employer relationship. And if a company is actually growing in a place, I think that they should step over direct relationship with their employees and so on. So I think sometimes EOR is being misused by companies, by employees, and so on. And I think that as long as you keep it into the right intention of the model, this is a great model. I would say that the current environment is also a very, very big risk to the industry. If we are taking cases where employees are actually protected more when they are hired through an EOR, if their company is going down in a case of insolvency and so on, this is a threat in general to the industry. And I think that eventually the only way to go around this is also to assure that you or we as a company, as an industry on the EOR side, can create rules of the game and rules on those financial kind of arrangements that make sense, because this model can be highly overused or highly abused in specific cases. And I think that eventually this is a great model. This is a great engagement between all parties when the fundamentals are right and correct.
So I'm going to jump in because I actually disagree a little bit there. I disagree with that that employers have to have that direct relationship with the employee in regards to from a legal perspective. Because in our opinion, the employee and the employer, we call the employer the managing employer. So the relationship is there. It's for us, it's just it's a piece of paper. It's a document that says with legal employer, but we're the ones processing payroll. The relationship that's managed by the employee and employer, or the managing employer from that perspective, that's what's key. When you look at payroll organizations, a lot of times employees get paychecks and they have direct deposits with the payroll company's name on it. They have those things, but from an employer perspective, I think that those relationships need to be established. It can be with the BUR, without the BUR, but the client is managing that employee on a day-to-day basis. I don't think that's a threat. I think that there is a time at what point that the employer must think about maybe setting up their own entity from a cost perspective. But I've seen where employers say, look, I'm looking to be more advantageous and more strategic in how I'm going to expand my business. And I'm not going to put high concentration of employees in a given country. I'm going to diversify that from that perspective. And when you're at 5 employees, maybe that's not the time you set up an entity. I think that the EOR relationship can be a partnership with our clients. And I think and then the EOR relationship can help them in the back office. And maybe I'm a little biased there because I come from the US, which the PEO model is very much that same. This is first from the EOR model. The EOR model versus from PEO. The PEO model is very much that there's 2 employers, and then from that perspective, it's a partnership both with the PEO and the EO and then the client. That's the model that we've developed. It is a partnership with the client. We're there to help them. We're helping give them be more advantageous, more flexible, more competitive. For us, a client that may want to expand or set up an entity with 10 employees and let's say Austria, for example, we have hundreds of employees in Austria. And so we're going to be more competitive in benefits for them. We're going to be more competitive from a pension perspective. We're going to be competitive from that perspective and more cost effective. We can help them find and retain better talent because we're more cost effective. The same model that's in the US from a PEO model. We're bigger. And so they get bigger bulk, they get better brands. They're still managing the employee. They still manage that relationship on a day-to-day basis. We're just the back office support helping them, grow their business. And I think that's very different than maybe what you propose there, because that partnership that we create, again, another reason why that direct model is very important is building that relationship, helping the company grow no matter where they are around the world. They don't have to have an entity. We can support that because they are still the managing.
Rick, you're right. When you come from the US perspective, you're absolutely right. But the PEO model was ingrained more on insurance arbitrage and benefit arbitrage, which is not true world over, right? World over, those opportunities don't exist. And the smaller employers, as Init pointed out, have the same opportunity like a larger employer. Why? Because yes, in days come, those I believe opportunity for us as an industry. If we can build those aspects up and larger, better benefit structure beyond what a normal small employer can give, then maybe, yes, that might be a differentiator so that the employers continue beyond the threshold of 2, 3, or 5, even when they go to 10, 15, 20, because you can provide something of more value besides just pure employee risk mitigation, which is kind of. Were there any thoughts from your end in terms of the threats?
Following on from Rick, you could actually also envisage a future where everybody is employed through a third party. That is teachable and that has benefits. For instance, what Rick mentioned, that you get better benefit packages and so forth. But anyway, I mean, this is a bit futuristic, I suppose. But in terms of threats, I agree with everything that has been said, particularly with your. I think that's where the threats lie. We need to make sure as an industry that we provide good services, compliant services. And I also agree, like right now, I don't think there is a really, really, really good service out there yet. That is yet to be built, and it's up to us to make this happen. But overall, I do think that there are more opportunities than threats out there. I do think that EOR will evolve. I think there will be various models that perhaps fall under the EOR, but every jurisdiction is different, as you know, and I think we need to adopt to this and provide compliant services. But overall, the market pool, the demand for international employment is here. It will not go away. It will only ever grow in the foreseeable future. So I think there's a lot of work for us. I also think that we will see services that we, like right now, don't even anticipate in the future because more and more people will enter this space, and then we will be required to even help them in very different areas as well. So to sum it up, I think there are, we need to be careful. There are a lot of difficult things that we need to solve, but overall, I think the opportunity is enormous, and that's very exciting.
Absolutely. Gunther, thank you so much for this. And on that note, we're out of time, but I truly appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you so much for being part of this year's Power Panel. I wish we had more time. There's so many more questions. I'm sure we all have lot of discussions with that. But once again, Rick, Job, Inat, Gunther, thank you so much for your time. And I thank you on behalf of Niamo and everybody else around the world in our audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What a way to kickstart this year's edition of Evolve Beyond Borders. Inspired much? Up next, starting in a few minutes, we'll be joined by some of the industry's leading authorities in global payroll and HR. Take a look at the agenda and choose the session track you'd like to be a part of. Today, the Global Agenda track will witness live session stream from studios across Atlanta, followed by London and Amsterdam. You may also choose to go with one of the other tracks, where our speakers will be joining virtually from across the globe, making this a truly borderless event. If you find yourself in a session that wrapped up ahead of schedule, feel free to pop into one of the other tracks, where you can follow sessions by other speakers. If you find yourself split with different choices, don't worry, we've got you covered. We'll be making these sessions available on demand for all who've registered to be a part of Evolve Beyond Borders. So please grab a cup of coffee or your favorite beverage as we set up the stage for the remainder of the event. I'll be back towards the end of today's show with a few important pointers for day 2 of Evolve Beyond Borders. Stay tuned.